When a lizard man and an 18-year-old girl got together, the two immediately fell into an incredibly toxic relationship. This is a case involving lizard people, washed-up reality stars, biker gangs, and a very strange ending, so buckle up. Today's story focuses on the tumultuous relationship between two people, Bronson Ellery, a man better known as the Lizard Man, a moniker given to him by the police due to his appearance, and his 18-year-old on-again off-again girlfriend, Chelsea Schilling. Better yet, the two were living in none other than the Florida of Australia, the Gold Coast. So let's start at the beginning. Back in his teen years, Bronson started to become fascinated with pigeons, began to believe in alien conspiracies, and enjoyed spelling bees, of all things. More than any of that, though, he became very interested in tattoos and body modification. By his early teens, he already had a complete sleeve done, moving on to bigger and bolder tattoos, even getting the words commit and lover tattooed across his face. One of his tattoos was none other than a big old swastika, and funnily enough, Bronson's own lawyer said that he didn't really fall into these beliefs, he was merely, quote, being a dickhead. By his late teens, Bronson's face, arms, and fingers were nearly completely covered in ink. Around this time, he began to become fascinated with the gang life as well, falling in love with a group of men he called renegades, seemingly an offshoot of the more well-known Bandidos biker gang. With that fascination came a life of crime, with the Lizard Man hopping in and out of prison for years. While in jail, he continued getting tattoos, getting his chest, back, and legs done behind bars. After getting out, he covered the entire top of his head and remainder of his face in a tattoo shop. After suffering the life of a criminal for a while, Bronson decided to change paths and dedicate himself to his true passion, death metal. He said that most of the reason behind tattooing his whole body was to really dive into the music life, saying, "I knew I was never going to do a normal job or anything. I knew I was going to be fully dedicated to music. I was going to make it hard for myself and just cover myself in tattoos so there was no other option." Bronson, adopting the name Solitary Sun, attempted to start a career as a metal musician. He came up with a whole album, made a YouTube channel to host his videos, and started pumping out content. However, much to his dismay, the response to his music was not great. He got nothing but the most scathing reviews, causing him to completely disable comments on his whole channel, dubbing the reviewers haters. Bronson was good friends with a man named Nick Blandthorne. Nick felt that his tattoos didn't accurately reflect who he really was as a person, saying that he had a much goofier personality in reality. He said that, when lightning struck, Bronson would blame it on aliens. He took time to feed pigeons outside, and even joked that he and Nick would make a great-looking gay couple. Nick said, "I'm seeing all these pictures of him with guns. I just think it's funny because I'd get to his place at times in the morning and the first thing he'd do, before he'd feed himself, he'd feed the pigeons. That's how tough he is. We'd do spelling bees at his house. He'd go, spell parallelogram. I couldn't even say the thing. We'd sit there and dead set do spelling bees." The two even gave each other some tattoos, with Nick getting a koi fish on his arm in honor of Bronson, and Bronson returning the favor by getting a dragon on his back. While Bronson's metal career and YouTube channel were both massive flops, they did at least get him out of the Bandidos biker gang in 2014. In fact, he was very vocal of his hatred for them by this point. He claims that they had turned on him in the clubhouse, saying, "They just turn on their own. They've done it to heaps of other members in the past. They reckon someplace thought I burned down their tattoo shop, which I didn't, so instead of fighting them because they were scared to, they just got rid of me." He said that the whole gang was, quote, "a bunch of guys that try and act hard with tattoos with nothing better to do with their lives," adding, "They join a gang and call it a name and wear the t-shirts and walk around town thinking they're tough when they're really not." Around this time, Bronson started dating an 18-year-old young woman named Chelsea Schilling. Their relationship quickly became nothing but toxic, with Bronson often treating her badly to say the least. Her family was not supportive of this relationship, seeing Bronson as a violent monster. They had more than enough reason to see him this way. A neighbor of Bronson's came out of his home one day to see Bronson dragging Chelsea into his home against her will. He ran up and pulled the Lizard Man off of her. Bronson puffed out his chest at the man, but backed down when he squared up to him. While Bronson went back inside, this neighbor took Chelsea to a nearby bus stop to get her home. She thanked him, saying, "You saved me from getting belted up." This neighbor chose not to follow up with the police, feeling that they most likely wouldn't even look into the matter. Chelsea got so desperate to get away from Bronson that she started to contemplate faking her own death in order to escape, wanting to start a new life somewhere else. She even told her mother about this, with her mother later saying, "I only found out after the fact, but she needed money because she wanted to change her identity or she'd need to fake her own death. She even said to me, and this is a long time ago, something along the lines of, 'Sometimes it's better staying with him because at least you know you're not going to die.'" A friend of Chelsea's confirmed these desires, saying that she actually planned for an even more extreme plan, allowing her own family to believe that she was dead. That friend said, "What she wanted to do was be dead to everybody, so she didn't exist. She was going to be dead to her mom and dad." Chelsea took out a restraining order against Bronson only 1 year after getting together back in 2015. He quickly broke this within 3 weeks and ended up spending 3 months in prison. Chelsea decided that this was prime time to go through with her plan and flee the area while he was still incapacitated. Chelsea quit her job at Harbor Town, where Bronson would often show up during work hours to bother her. She cut her hair and dyed it a different color. She wanted to be unrecognizable. She moved from the Gold Coast out to New South Wales. Things didn't last, though. She missed her family too much and moved back not too long after. Around this time, Chelsea wrote on Facebook, "I'm sorry to be so negative, but I want everyone to know that if I get hurt or die, Bronson Ellery, person in picture, is responsible, or Chris Cairns doing his dirty work. I've seen firsthand what they do and would never post this for attention." However, as these toxic on-again, off-again relationships tend to go, Chelsea got back together with Bronson. The couple, now being 24 and 20 years old, didn't end up any better off this time than the last time around. Those close to them would say that they caused one another a bad energy and had a toxic love. Bronson began to spiral out of control. His drug use caused his paranoia and violent tendencies to only get worse and worse over time. His paranoia even worried his own family, with his sister saying that he seemed scared, but she didn't really know why. Friends of his who wanted to remain anonymous have said that he opened up, admitting that he was a police informant, saying, "I'm pretending to be part of Sadadara to inform police what they are doing and they are paying me for it." Sadadara was a rapidly growing biker gang in the Gold Coast area. Another friend said, "He looked like he was on something, and I know Bronson was trying to stay away from the ice and get his life on track, but the night I went there I'd never seen him so scared." Other friends said that he felt people were after him, after his life. One night he was standing outside with a few friends when a black car drove by fairly slowly. This alone was enough to give Bronson a chill and cause him to go back inside. Bronson was friends with none other than a washed-up reality TV star named Christopher Paul Loden. Chris was featured on a show called World's Strictest Parents when he was 16 years old. On this show, rowdy Australian teenagers got sent overseas for stricter parenting. Chris himself ended up in South Africa. That didn't really do anything to help Chris. He spent the next several years of his life in and out of jail. While living this life, he met the Lizard Man himself. One night in 2016, Chris and Bronson were driving around. Bronson was driving while Chris was riding passenger. This car was stolen, which Chris knew but didn't really care about. Bronson was brandishing a sawed-off rifle and a machete. The two pulled up to a house, stormed inside, and Bronson began threatening a couple of occupants, telling them he was going to chop them up and put a bullet in them. The two men fled, and Bronson and Chris then left. A few days later, another friend of Bronson's, Michael Warburton, age 26, began to worry about what he might do. He went over to Bronson's home and took his rifle and a bunch of ammunition, feeling he would be better off without them. But then, only a couple of days later, Bronson's girlfriend Chelsea went missing. November 11th, 2016. Chelsea and Bronson had been together at his apartment along with several other friends, including Chris. That fateful day, the two got into an argument. Chelsea attempted to leave the apartment only for Bronson to forcefully drag her back inside. He bashed her head into the tiles on his apartment floor over and over, leaving her with a large gash across her face. After she fell unconscious, he took a pillow and strangled her until the very last bit of life left her, all while everyone watched in horror. After he killed her, Bronson walked into the other room and changed into his best suit. Two of the other people in the apartment ran off into the bathroom to hide, wondering what he might do next, including Chris. Bronson turned on some of his favorite music and pulled out some sort of syringe. Inside the syringe was what they call a hot shot, a lethal mixture of drugs. He injected himself with the drugs and lied down next to Chelsea's body. Shortly after, Bronson's friend Michael, who had previously taken his rifle, arrived at the apartment only to react in shock as he came across the bloody scene. He saw Chelsea lying on the ground with Bronson next to her. Bronson was still alive, with Michael saying that he was inconsolable. He told Michael, "I promised her I would go with her," before passing away. Michael then, likely out of fear of dealing with the police himself, left the scene. Bronson's other friend Nick was, unfortunately, the one to ultimately come over and find the bodies a day later. It seems that he was the one who had reported everything to the police. Needless to say, he says that this has traumatized him. Chris and the other bystanders at the time of the crime weren't to face any charges, as there were no bystander laws in the area. They weren't seen as having any responsibility in stopping the murder. Because of this, Chelsea's mother, Bonnie, voiced her desire to have these laws put into place in the area. Others signed a petition for the state parliament that called for penalties to be given to witnesses who failed to report serious crimes. Chris, although he couldn't be charged with anything in relation to the whole murder, was charged after the police looked more closely into him. One charge was unlawful use of a motor vehicle in relation to the stolen car that he and Bronson had driven a few days prior. Chris refused to comment, aside from proclaiming his innocence. He already had a rap sheet including charges such as fraud and theft, so this wasn't anything new to him. Another woman who was at the scene of the crime was later charged in relation to a home invasion case and was sentenced to 2.5 years in prison. Michael was later caught by the police and taken in for questioning, where he adamantly refused to answer anything they asked him. In fact, he even gave the police a fake name, using his own brother's name and throwing him under the bus. To make matters worse, he had drugs on hand at the time as well. Michael was arrested for drug possession and giving the police a false name. Police raided his home in Pimpama, finding Bronson's gun, a load of ammo, and a pair of nunchucks of all things. His lawyer argued that Michael was the father of a young child with special needs and had to be near him instead of constantly going to the police station for more questioning. Michael was charged with possession of a weapon, possession of a restricted item, possession of explosives, an unrelated driving offense, and finally failure to appear in court. He was sentenced to 2 years in jail, but his sentence was ultimately suspended. Police found that Bronson had left a note behind in the home, one meant for his family. That note has never been released or detailed in any way. The police have never even allowed his family to see it. He left one more note for Chelsea's family, in which he apologized for killing her. He said, "Frankly, I'm apologizing for killing your daughter. I loved her." Chelsea's family pushed for the Queensland coroner to open an inquest into her death. They were still searching for answers as to why this had happened. They wanted to know what events led up to the murder itself. Her mother, Bonnie, said, "Why was our daughter hunted down like an animal? Why did she fight so hard for anonymity and a normal life away from Bronson Ellery? Was our daughter's life in vain?" The family said that they had too many unanswered questions and called for justice in the case. They noted that the psychological impact had been particularly hard on Chelsea's little sister and best friend. They wanted some sort of closure. Unfortunately, it's more than likely that no information that came out would ever make them feel any better. In the end, both Chelsea and Bronson are gone. There won't be any sort of justice. Michael's association with the Lizard Man never really subsided, and his own life of crime never came to an end. Rather than spend time with his special needs child, he's been in and out of jail for years. 1 year later, he broke his ankle when his car was rammed over a drug debt. After, he was arrested when he refused to stop for police even after being slowed down by road spikes. He was found with a bunch of stolen credit cards and even steroids on hand. He pleaded guilty to a whopping 9 charges, such as evading police, forgery, unlawfully using a motor vehicle, and possession of a dangerous drug. He begged for parole, saying, quote, "I don't like jail." Showing up in court via video, he scoffed when the court suggested that he must like spending time in jail given his track record. He actually somehow did get this parole after being jailed for a little while. He told the judge that he was going to leave his criminal past behind him, but the judge pointed out that that's the same thing he said the last time. Christopher Paul Loden hasn't changed either. He's still in and out of jail as of 2020 at least. Despite having a newborn baby, he's still on drugs and still unable to get his shit together. Chelsea's mother, Bonnie, has continued to campaign on behalf of domestic violence victims ever since the murder. She said at a rally, "How many lives need to be innocently taken by the actions of selfish people?" She continues to call for the better protection of victims of domestic violence and stalking online, being particularly active on social media. She writes, "The government laws need better protection for all these innocent people. Pieces of paper do absolutely nothing. It's not a wall, it's not a barrier, it's a piece of paper. Put an anklet band on these bastards and monitor every move. Even if the victim has to wear a bracelet to alert them that the perpetrators are nearby. And an alarm will go off at the police station to notify them if these bastards are way too close to the victim so the police can get them before the perpetrator gets the victims. Once again, thank you for watching my video. If you found it interesting, please give it a like, it helps me out in the algorithm, and feel free to subscribe if you want to see more content like this. Go ahead and follow me on social media, it really helps me out, as if anything ever happens to this channel, that's the only way you can ever really hear about it. If you want to support the channel even further, I do have a Patreon account, which I always keep linked down in the description as well. This has been your host, Kyle. Thank you, and good night.